Chapter 7. The Sun. When Misaki hit her sword, she nailed the floorboards down over it. It was a promise to herself. She might never be able to destroy the part of her that was aggressive and willful, but she could bury it. That was what she had thought at the time. A Jujaka is a fine thing to be, Master Wang Era had once told her, undoubtedly the best theotype for a sword fighter. Why, she had asked. Most strong things are rigid. If you are water, you can shift to fit any mold and freeze yourself strong. You can be strong in any shape. You can be anything. I can be strong in any shape, Misaki told herself as she packed the hammer and nails away. I can be anything. If she had adapted to the dangers of Livingston's dark alleys, how hard could it be to master marriage and motherhood? As Nagi smiles on strong men, Nami smiles on patient women, her mother had told her on her wedding day, all aglow with pride. It will all be worth it when you hold your child in your arms, her father had said. It will be worth it when you watch them grow. And Misaki had believed them. Not because it made any sense. Because she had to. Because if she didn't believe it was worth it, then what had she done? So, when her new husband barely even looked at her in the aftermath of their wedding, she kept smiling. When her father-in-law snapped at her, she bowed and spoke sweetly and did as she was told. It would all be worth it. When her husband's frigid Nyama made her skin crawl, she gritted her teeth and endured his touch. It would all be worth it. She did not fear physical intimacy, but she liked to melt into the sweet sting of heat, not grate and buckle under ice colder than her own. She needed warmth to soften her jagged edges, and Takeru's Nyama was as far from warmth as a distant planet. She did her best to yield to his touch. There were a few times she couldn't help it. She recoiled, her arms moving automatically to shield herself. Wordlessly, Takeru took her wrists in his firm, freezing cold grip, placed them on either side of her as if positioning a doll, and continued. All her life, Misaki had been told she was beautiful. Her husband must not have thought so, because he never looked her in the face, instead fixing his eyes on the pillows beside her. Though their skin was touching, they might as well have been a galaxy away from one another. Eventually, she resigned herself to the idea that she was nothing more to him than a vessel, a womb to carry his sons, but that was all right. It would all be worth it when she held her child. As she reached out to hold Mamoru for the first time, she forced a smile. But as his tiny body curled up against her breast, he was as cold as Takeru. She held him close and waited, but the joy she was supposed to feel never came. All she felt was a frigid echo of her husband's Jia, pulsing from the little body, reminding her that the child she held in her arms was not truly hers. He was a Matsuda. It was then that she should have realized that the divine light she had been promised was not coming. It was never coming. But Misaki had always been too stubborn or too stupid to acknowledge her mistakes. So, she forced down the tears, smiled her sweetest smile, and held the infant closer, even as the feel of him made her want to shudder and retch. She forced herself to love him. As Mamoru grew, so did his Jia. By the age of 3, he had the aura of a much older Theonite. Morning mist would reach out to touch his skin with reverent fingers, standing water would freeze at his touch, and dewdrops would slide from blades of grass to dog his footsteps. Misaki had grown up in a household of powerful, purebred Jujakalu, but even she had never heard of such Nyama in such a small child. Were you and Takeru-sama like this when you were little? Misaki asked her brother-in-law one evening as Mamoru splashed in a puddle in the courtyard. His little hands sent the water flying high into the air. A few drops turned to ice and pinged off the roof while others burst into puffs of fog. Was your Jia this strong when you were 3? Takashi scratched the base of his neck. To tell you the truth, I don't really recall. My first memory of using my Jia was when Grandfather Mizudori started training me for combat. How old were you? Misaki asked. Takashi shrugged. 5? 6 maybe? You could check with our father. Then again, maybe don't were the words Takashi meant to say but couldn't. Matsuda Susumu tended to get particularly ill-tempered any time someone raised the subject of his son's overwhelming power. It was a sore subject for him. So, You didn't start properly training your Jia until you were school age? Misaki said. That's the way it's usually done. Usually, Misaki repeated, but Mamoru is an unusual child. Shouldn't someone teach him to control that power before he hurts himself? The average 3-year-old Theonite didn't manifest enough power for this to be an issue, but Mamoru's abilities were rapidly approaching a point where they would become genuinely dangerous. Takashi shrugged. When the boy starts his training, will be up to his father. A gentle reminder that Misaki was overstepping her authority. Of course, Nisama, she said, bowing her head. And, knowing Takaru, he won't want to train Mamoru-kun himself until the boy has at least learned his fundamentals at school, Takashi continued. Oops. He lifted a hand to stop an arc of half-frozen water droplets before it hit himself and Misaki. Careful there, little one, he laughed, vaporizing the drops with a flick of his fingers. You almost hit your sweet mother. My. He mused, staring at Mamoru. Maybe he could use a little help. You should ask Takaru if he can start training a little early. Misaki did, but as usual, Takaru had no interest in his child's parenting and even less interest in his wife's opinions on it. As Takashi had predicted, he said, I am a master jijaka and swordsman. I don't train little children, but I'll train him once he's worthy of what I have to teach. Now, bring me more tea. Misaki nodded and did as she was told, but she decided that someone had to teach Mamoru control. If his father, uncle, and grandfather weren't going to, why shouldn't she? She was his mother, after all, and whether or not it became a lady, she had plenty of techniques worth teaching. She started out with the simple games she had played with her brothers as a child, racing ice chunks down the floor like cars, building snow towers, tossing a ball of liquid water back and forth without spilling any on the floor. Mamoru excelled at and quickly tired of the games that occupied most jijaka children for years, and Misaki found herself walking him through more advanced techniques. You want to make sure you leave a little cushion of snow between your knuckles and the ice, she said, guiding Mamoru's Jia as he froze water over his small fist. That's it. Now try again. Mamoru hesitated, but obeyed his mother and swung his fist into the rock. Oh. His little eyebrows shot up in surprise. It doesn't hurt. That's the idea. Misaki smiled. This way, even if you've got delicate little fingers like Ka-chan's, you can punch just about anything without damaging your hand. I want to try again. Mamoru exclaimed, shaking the water from his hand. Mamoru practiced hitting the boulder again and again while his grandfather watched from across the courtyard with a sour expression. Misaki had noticed that her father-in-law's permanent scowl seemed to deepen whenever he watched her showing Mamoru a technique, but she had elected to ignore it. A reasonable man couldn't possibly be angry with a mother for teaching her child to control his power. Of course, Matsuda Susumu was not a reasonable man. He finally spoke up the day Misaki taught Mamoru to congeal blood. The boy, then 5, had skinned both knees on the path in front of the house. Worried that his crying might set off his temperamental grandfather, she had shown him the advanced technique to distract him, not realizing that that would displease her father-in-law far more than the noise. Misaki, the old man, snapped just as she told Mamoru to try the next scab on his own. A word. Of course, Matsuda-sama. Misaki hurried to kneel before her father-in-law, just out of earshot of Mamoru. What is it? What do you think you're doing? Teaching my son how to deal with an injury, Misaki said. That is not your place. But Misaki protested before she could stop herself. Scabbing is a useful technique for a warrior to know. Matsuda Susumu's face twisted. Know your place, you stupid woman. What would you understand of a warrior's Jia? What would you understand of a warrior's Jia? Misaki thought savagely. I'm sorry. She bowed her head. I was out of line. I won't do it again. I should hope not, Susuma huffed. Matsuda's fight with pure, untainted water. We have no use for your filthy Tsusano blood magic, and a warrior has no use for a woman's input. Misaki caught her rage and ruthlessly smothered it before it could rise to the surface. Forgive me, Matsuda-sama. Every time Misaki's sense of duty failed her, and she had the urge to lash out at her father-in-law, she stopped her tongue through sheer vindictive cruelty, reminding herself that her sharpest barbs couldn't inflict worse than what this man had already suffered. He had spent his whole life a disappointment, an heir to the Matsuda name too weak to produce a whispering blade, despised by his parents, surpassed by his sons. As the only boy among many daughters, Matsuda Susumu had been his generation's sole hope of carrying on the Matsuda techniques. The family had poured years into his training, but he never displayed the power or talent of his forebears. He never achieved a whispering blade. In desperation, his aging father taught the technique to Susumu's sons as soon as they were old enough. Both Takashi and Takaru proved superior Jijakalu to their father, mastering the whispering blade in their teenage years. And what happened to a man who devoted his entire life and soul to a single pursuit only to fail entirely? Misaki supposed, after so many years of disappointment, he turned into a wrinkled husk of a human who could only find solace in tormenting those younger and better than himself. The cruelest thing Misaki could do to a bitter creature like her father-in-law was keep serving, smiling, and pushing out babies like nothing bothered her. The cruelest thing she could do was serve her purpose, like he never could. She bowed herself out of Matsuda Susumu's presence with a demure smile and returned to her son. "Look, Ka-chan." Mamoru beamed. "I can do it. I'm doing it." "Stop." Misaki put her hands over the boys, stopping his Jia. His smile disappeared. "Why? I shouldn't have showed you. This is not a technique you should use. Please, forget that I taught you." "You mean I can't use it again?" Misaki hesitated. "Maybe." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "Maybe keep it on hand for emergencies." Jia blood clotting could save a fighter's life on the battlefield, and she would be damned if she was going to tell her son right to his face that the purity of his technique was more important than his life. "For emergencies only," she said sternly. "Yes, Ka-chan." From that day on, Misaki was careful to remember that Mamoru was not hers. His accomplishments didn't belong to her. They belonged to his father and grandfather. Having taught Mamoru the basics of control, Misaki stopped meddling in his development. Soon, he went off to school, where proper fighters, men of the Matsuda, Aikino, and Yukino lines, taught him to use his powers as a man should. Misaki was pregnant again. She felt the nyama of a child growing inside her and plastered her smile in place to do it all again. She had borne the pain once without a single tear or word of complaint. She could do it again. She didn't realize that the only thing more painful than bearing another Matsuda son would be failing to do so. "You lost it." Matsuda Susumu snarled. "What do you mean you lost it?" Misaki tried to answer, but a wave of dizziness overtook her. The lines of the tatama crawled and swam beneath her knees. The room was tilting. She had dragged herself from the blood-soaked birthing bed, washed herself, and dressed when the midwife said that her father-in-law demanded an audience. The finata hadn't even finished the purification rites. She had always had exceptional stamina and pain tolerance, but that had been the end of it. Her body was shaking. The tatama swirled and became waves. Maybe if she fell forward, they would swallow her up and wash all of this away. "You stupid, selfish woman," her father-in-law was saying somewhere in the distance. She tried to hear him, but only made out fractured pieces. "Sons. Strong sons. The reason. The only reason you are here." He sounded angrier than usual. Misaki caught herself with a hand on the solid floor before she could fall face-first into the welcoming waves. "Pathetic. You've just cost me a grandchild and you're too arrogant to even speak. You really are a selfish woman." Misaki struggled to make her voice work. "I'm crack." She registered the impact before she felt the sting in her cheek. Credit where credit was due, Matsuda Susumu hit hard for an old man. If you can't give this family sons, you are worthless. Through her haze, Misaki caught the note of satisfaction in Susumu's voice. She had finally proven herself the disappointment he had always said she was. She had failed in her only purpose. Finally, she was truly lower than he was. "Don't forget why you are here." Misaki had lifted herself onto her elbows, but couldn't find the strength to push herself up onto her knees. Above her, Susumu let out a disgusted noise. "She's your woman. You deal with her." Yes, Tusama, a second voice said. Takaru. Misaki was so disoriented that she hadn't even realized that her husband was in the room. He was so still, his icy Nyama was so like his father's, that he simply disappeared into the background. It wasn't until the older man had hobbled out of the room that Takaru moved, taking slow steps until he came to a stop over his woman. His bare feet swam into focus before Misaki, followed by the hem of his hakama, and suddenly she felt the warmth of tears in her eyes. It was almost a relief. She had spent so many years playing the good wife, smiling, holding back her grief, but she was not a good wife anymore. Now she had failed him. Now, surely, it would be all right for her to cry. It was the expected thing, wasn't it? Even if she had had the strength to lift her head, she wouldn't have looked up at him. How could she? She had just lost his child. He must be furious, come, Misaki. His voice was calm. You need to get some rest. She didn't move. Crouching down, Takaru cupped her cheek where his father had hit her. The gesture was utilitarian, a cold object to bring down the swelling. He did not even try to meet her eyes. Can you stand? I'm sorry, Misaki said, her voice small as it strained against the tears trapped in her throat. Takaru-sama, I'm so sorry. That's all right, he said, sliding one arm beneath her knees and putting the other around her shoulders. I'll carry you. Takaru, as always, handled her as if she were a particularly fragile doll. Maybe he could feel how rigid she grew under his hands and didn't want to scare her. Maybe he truly thought all women were so frail a simple touch could break them. It was impossible to tell what Takaru was thinking behind that impassive expression. Sometimes Misaki considered it a mercy. Now it made her unbearably lonely. She was limp as he lifted her in his arms and carried her from the room. She didn't know if she started shivering in response to his Nyama or for some other reason, but once the shaking started, it wouldn't stop. It was more than just cold, more than grief. It was panic, as she realized that he wasn't going to yell at her. She wasn't going to cry. And if she couldn't even cry, what kind of monster was she? Pull yourself together. Takaru didn't quite look at her, staring ahead at the floor just past her shoulder. You're going to be fine. But Misaki was not fine. She was weak, worthless, selfish, and every other demeaning thing Matsuda Susumu had ever called her. She was a monster who couldn't even shed a tear for her lost child. What kind of husband said that was fine? What man with a beating heart could say that? When Takaru lowered her onto the futon, Misaki found her fingers tangling in the front of his haori, gripping with all the strength left in them. Stay, she thought desperately. He couldn't leave her alone here with her darkness, strangled, unable to cry, unable to move. Stay. Let go, Takaru said without emotion. But Misaki's hands curled tighter. If he walked away now, she would turn to stone. Misaki, this is unseemly, Takaru said coldly. Let go. Takaru-sama. She searched his face one more time for some hint of grief, or empathy, or rage, anything. Gods, anything. I'm sorry, I failed you. I will try again. He said it as if she had just dropped some eggs on the way back from market. After you have your strength back. Icy hands closed over hers and effortlessly pried her fingers loose. Rest. Takaru, she whispered as he walked away. Please do as you're told. He closed the door, and in that moment, he might as well have been the one who slapped her. Nami, he might as well have taken his whispering blade and carved everything from inside her. Something in Misaki was dead after that day. She no longer saw her husband or Mamoru as they passed through the house around her. Every night, Takaru clinically opened her kimono, pushed her down, and lay with her. He put another baby in her, and she lost that one too. After the second miscarriage, she began to think that she really was a doll, stiff, unfeeling, incapable of producing life because she was not really alive. There were horror stories of Susanoo puppet masters, manipulating the blood in the bodies of others dead and living, making them dance like dolls. Sometimes Misaki wondered if she had subconsciously become one of them, puppeting her own gutted body through each day. It wasn't until Setsuko married into the family that a pulse flickered to life in the doll's chest. Setsuko was the first person who had ever talked to Misaki about the miscarriages. It had been the subject of their first argument, the first real argument Misaki had had in years. Misaki couldn't even remember what she had said to set her sister-in-law off, some innocuous thing about being stupid or useless, and Setsuko had slammed her spatula down on the stovetop. "Stop that." Startled, Misaki could only stare for a moment before stammering, "Stop what? You keep saying such horrible things about yourself." "Well, that's because I don't care why," Setsuko snapped. "I won't have you calling yourself useless or evil anymore, you understand? I won't have it." "But it's true," Misaki protested. "I haven't given my husband a son in years. I've miscarried twice now. What do you call a woman like that?" "Not useless," Setsuko said. "Not evil. A miscarriage doesn't make you a bad woman, doesn't it? My husband is a powerful jajaka from a line that has never had any trouble producing sons. If his babies are dying before they're born, it's not a problem with him. It's me." The more Misaki had thought about it over the years, the more it seemed that it must be her fault. She hadn't really wanted the babies after Mamoru. Not with the passion she was supposed to. That in itself was a sin against Nagi and Nami. A strong jajaka like Misaki could drown a child inside her if she didn't want it enough. She had no recollection of trying to end the pregnancies. Both times she had meant to carry the babies to term. Even if she had felt no excitement at the prospect, she had fully expected to give birth, but there was so much bitterness trapped inside her. Could she have caused the miscarriages in her sleep? While she dreamed. Had her subconscious risen like a sleepwalking demon and drowned the babies? "You didn't do it," Setsuko said firmly. "Anyone who tries to tell you that you did is an idiot." "But our father-in-law thought." Misaki choked as his voice rang through her head. "You selfish, stupid woman, you did this. You killed my grandchildren." For years, she had sat still with those words permeating her mind like poison. "You killed my grandchildren. Our father-in-law is dead. What he thought doesn't matter anymore. If it did, I wouldn't be here." Setsuko's okonomiyaki, forgotten on the stove, had started to smoke. "The only thing that matters is what you think. Do you think it's your fault you miscarried?" "I hope not." Misaki was surprised at how easily the truth fell out of her mouth. "Then it's not your fault," Setsuko said resolutely. One of the okonomiyaki in the pan caught fire. "Oh no," Misaki started toward the stove, but Setsuko stopped her. "Let it burn," Setsuko said savagely. "It was going to taste terrible anyway. Look, I know I look like a dumb country girl, and I am, but I know a thing or two about the messy business you nobles don't like to talk about. My auntie is a midwife. She'll tell you a woman can't get rid of a healthy baby unless she really tries, and more often than not it'll kill her. I reckon getting rid of a Matsuda baby would be even harder. If you were the reason behind the miscarriages, you would know it." Having said her piece, Setsuko turned to clean up the mess she had made of the stove, leaving Misaki to stare at her in a mute stupor. It had been a long time, such a long time, since anyone had had that kind of faith in her. She wasn't sure what to do with it. "But if it wasn't my Gia," she said, hating that she could hear the fear in her own voice, "then I'm broken. What if I can't have any more children? Then your husband still has a perfectly good heir in Mamoru, and you have nothing to be ashamed of. I thought you said you didn't really want more children anyway. But that's the only reason I'm here." Misaki's voice shook. "My marriage wasn't like yours, Setsuko. I'm not here because my husband loves me. I'm here to give him sons. What are you? A baby dispenser?" Setsuko laughed, scrunching up her nose. Misaki would have laughed too, except that that was exactly what she was. And over the years, the thought had crushed her into something small. "That's why he married me." "Well, you married him back, didn't you?" Setsuko said. "I didn't have a choice. It was a weak lie." If Misaki wanted, she could have fled all of this and set fire to the bridges behind her. It just hadn't been that simple. "I swear, Misaki, I know you're smart, with your big vocabulary and your noble upbringing and your fancy Theonite Academy education, but sometimes you're the dumbest woman I've ever met. Excuse me, why don't you try taking responsibility for the things you can control instead of the things you can't?" Misaki considered arguing for a moment, then cocked her head at Setsuko as the other woman's words sank in. Are all Takayubi fisherwomen this smart, or just you? She asked finally. Just me, Setsuko said with a self-satisfied grin. How do you think I landed me a handsome husband so far above my station? Good point. Listen, little sister. Setsuko took Misaki's hands. I know we haven't known each other for long, but you don't strike me as someone so childish she can't take control of her own happiness. I don't know what you can play weak and dumb with me, but it's not going to work. There's a bright, strong woman in there. Setsuko put a hand on Misaki's chest. I'd like to meet her. Misaki let out a chuckle, the most genuine sound that had come out of her in a long time. Careful what you wish for. You don't. She paused when she realized that she had very nearly told Setsuko about the sword hidden beneath the floorboards at their feet. That had to stay buried. No matter how close she got to Setsuko, that was part of her that she could never revisit. But even with the sword firmly boarded up beneath them, Misaki felt a piece of her old smirk turn the corner of her mouth. Careful what you wish for. While the floorboards stayed nailed firmly in place, Setsuko had broken through Misaki's stupor, bringing a part of her to life again. Maybe it wasn't a perfect life, maybe she wasn't truly happy, but she had found it in her to produce 3 more children: Hiroshi, colder than Mamoru and even more powerful for his age, Nagisa, with his sharp eyes and infectious energy, and now Izumo. Misaki's 4th son wasn't as deathly cold as his brothers had been. Maybe that was a bad thing, maybe he didn't harbor the kind of frigid power his father was looking for, but it certainly made him easier to hold close to her breast. Yash, yash, she murmured into the infant's soft hair in between humming. You're all right, Izuku-en. You're all right. It was only the 3rd time he had woken up that night. Not bad. Naniko, Naniko yo, she sang softly. The moon shines down on dewy fields. In my hometown, beyond this mountain and the next, an old man used to play a driftwood flute. The sun, long since sunk beneath the sea, shines in the mother's mirror through the night. My grandparents are dewdrops on the grass and notes on the wind. Whisper, little sound, through the field, murmuring of all that we cherish, sighing for all that we mourn. My parents are dewdrops on the grass and notes on the wind. Quiver, little sound, through the field, weeping for what is past, laughing for tomorrow's joy. You and I are dewdrops on the grass and notes on the wind. Echo, little sound, through the field, all the things that are forever, all the things that fade away. Naniko, Naniko yo. Catch the moonlight and shine, little dewdrop, for beyond this mountain and the next, the old man plays on, the old man plays on. As she finished her lullaby, Izumo let out a tiny breath against her shoulder. He was asleep. She brushed the tears from the baby's face and slowly lowered him into his cradle. There you go, little one. Sleep well. She had just straightened up when a muffled sound made her stiffen. Someone was in the hall. Stepping out of the room, she peered down the corridor and caught movement in the shadows. Her hand flew to her hip, but of course, there was nothing there. Stupid. There hadn't been a sword there for 15 years. Who's there? She demanded. Sorry, Ka-chan. Mamoru. She let out her breath as her oldest son stepped into the lamplight. Somehow, she hadn't recognized his Nyama or his outline. In the dark, he almost cut the figure of a grown man. I was trying to walk softly, Mamoru said. I thought you were all asleep. And I thought you must have snuck in and gotten to bed some time during the night, Misaki returned, trying to sound reproachful rather than shaken. You know it's nearly morning? Yes, Ka-chan. I'm sorry. Your uncle told me he had consigned you and the new boy to roof cleaning duty. Don't tell me it took you this long to finish a simple chore. We ran into a problem. Mamoru looked at his feet. We didn't actually finish. So, not only did you get yourself in trouble, but you also failed to carry out your punishment. That wasn't like Mamoru. Come here. She motioned him further into the light. He stepped forward and her eyes passed over him, taking in his bruised face and dirt-smudged uniform. She had been so preoccupied with the new baby, and Mamoru had been so busy with school, that it had been a while since she had really looked at him. He had grown so much while she wasn't paying attention, standing almost as tall as his father. His skinny limbs had started to fill out with the muscles of an adult fighter, but his scrapes and bruises spoke of a boy's carelessness. "I'm confused," Misaki said. "Your uncle told me you gave the new kid a beating, not the other way around." Mamoru fidgeted. None of this is from him. We fell off the roof. What did you do that for? It was a mistake. Matsudas don't make mistakes. It was what Takeru always said to the boys, but she regretted the words when she saw the shattered expression on Mamoru's face. He really took them seriously. Of course, he did. Hey, Ka-chan was just joking. She offered him a smile. Change your clothes and I'll get you something to eat. I already ate, Mamoru said, at Kotetsukama's house. Kwang-san, the new boy, was injured from the fall, so we stopped to get his arm fixed, and they insisted we stay for dinner. Oh. It sounded as though Mamoru had had quite the night. Well, change out of your clothes anyway. You need to let me wash that uniform before you're seen in it again. Yes, ma'am. Mamoru nodded and moved down the hall to his room. He emerged clad in his blue house kimono, washed clean, bandages wound around his knuckles. Uniform, he murmured, handing his school clothes to his mother. Misaki expected him to retreat to his room to get some sleep while she worked, but he knelt and looked on in tense silence as she gathered water into the laundry tub. Tossing the uniform into the vessel, she added soap and began spinning the water with her dominant right hand, holding her left just above the tub to keep any wayward drops from sloshing over the edge. Once she was satisfied that she had spun all the blood and dirt from the fabric, she streamed the dirty water into a second tub and replaced it with fresh water. All the while, Mamoru watched her work, though he didn't really seem to see her. His mind was somewhere else. Is Tusama, does he know? He asked finally. Your father isn't home, Misaki said, working the clean water into a spin. He's sleeping overnight at the office, so you're off the hook for tonight. Not that Takeru was a particularly frightening disciplinarian. Despite his power and his intimidating demeanor, he was not as harsh as many parents in Takayubi. He didn't beat Mamoru. Mamoru said. I thought you might. I might what? Give me a talking to. Misaki looked at her son in surprise. Was he asking her to be angry with him? My role in this house is to rock the babies to sleep and comfort the little ones when they skin their knees. Are you a little baby? No, Ka-chan. When it comes to business like this, men's business, that's for your father to handle. But, she continued before she managed to stop herself, if you want someone to scold you, I'm annoyed enough to stand in for him at the moment. Oh, I didn't mean it seems like you've made one stupid mistake on top of another today, she said, pulling the water from Mamoru's uniform. How do you intend to fix it? I've apologized to Kwang Chulhi, Mamoru said. I thought I would go to school the short way, a bit early, and finish cleaning the roof on my own. Misaki looked out at the sky and raised an eyebrow. It's dawn, son. When are you planning to sleep? Oh. Mamoru blinked. I guess I'm not. I don't think that's a brilliant idea, Misaki said. Sleep is important for a growing young man. Of course, she wasn't one to talk considering the way she had spent her nights at 14 and Great Nagi. Was Mamoru really the age she had been back then? When had that happened? You should lie down and rest for at least a little while. Mamoru shook his head distractedly. I don't think I can. It was only then that Misaki looked more closely at his face and realized that he wasn't just exhausted. He was in pain. What's wrong? She wanted to ask, but that wasn't the sort of thing you asked a man and a warrior, even if you were his mother. It's not like you to get into a fight with another student, she probed finally. I know. Mamoru looked down at his knees. He fidgeted. Can I tell you why? The question seemed to tumble out of his mouth unbidden, before he could stop it. What? Can I tell you why I hit him? If you weren't able to control yourself, I don't care to hear any excuses, Misaki said sternly, and neither will your father. When he hears about this, please. Mamoru's voice was strained. I'm not trying to make excuses. There was a desperation in his eyes that Misaki couldn't remember ever seeing there before. What in the realms had happened to him? Before she could think better of it, she said softly, tell me. Kwang-san was saying bad things, treasonous things against the Empire. He said the history Hibiki-sensei teaches us isn't true. He said that during the Kaliba, a lot of men died here on the Kusanagi Peninsula and other places in Kaigen, and the Ranganese had to be driven back by the Yamenka reinforcements. He says the Empire covered up the deaths of all those people. Mamoru was watching her face intently, waiting for a reaction. I see, she said stiffly. You see. Mamoru's voice broke. That's all you're going to say? What else would I have to say about it? You. Mamoru looked at her like a drowning man watching the shore recede, and Misaki realized that he was waiting for her to tell him what to think. She was his parent, after all. She was supposed to have the answers. She was supposed to steer him right. You must have something to say, he implored. Misaki opened her mouth, closed it, bit the inside of her cheek. Finally, she said, your father would be very unhappy to hear you repeating those things in his house. Mamoru's gaze dropped in shame, and she felt a sudden surge of guilt. It was up to her to steer him right. The things that boy tells you are certainly treasonous. I know, Ka-chan. But they're true. Mamoru's head snapped up, bloodshot eyes wide with shock. Ka-chan. You are not to repeat this, she said quickly, to anyone. I should not need to explain that that kind of talk is not becoming of a Matsuda. But Mamoru looked like he was on the verge of a panic attack. His eyes glazed like the whole world had started reeling before them. But if it's all true then. Misaki watched the wheels turn in the boy's head and felt a bit of panic bubble to life in her own chest. What had she done? What had she been thinking? Mamoru was 14, unstable, impressionable, and he was a Matsuda. What had she been thinking telling him the truth? Why did you say that? Mamoru demanded alongside the admonishing voice in Misaki's head. Why would you tell me that? Because I assumed you were man enough to handle it. Misaki masked her anxiety under a harsh tone of voice. You're a Matsuda, aren't you? Pull yourself together. But. Mamoru was so shaken he couldn't get a hold of his words, let alone his tumultuous Nayama, which pulled at the water in the laundry tub, splashing some over the side. You're saying Hibiki-sensei really wasn't telling the truth about our history. The Empire has been lying. I just told you not to repeat any of that. Mamoru flinched as though struck. I'm sorry. He bowed his head. I won't forget again. I'm sorry. He clutched one bandaged hand in the other and hunched in on himself. Misaki could feel the pain radiating from him. Not just physical pain. He had taken worse beatings than this in training. His Nayama was churning, all that terrifying power he had inherited from his father writhing like a knotted serpent trying to free itself from its own coils, strangling and biting itself in confusion. Her boy was in agony. And Misaki experienced a stab of something she had not felt in a long time, protective instinct, an overwhelming desire to shelter, to comfort, to heal at any cost. She supposed this was what a good mother was supposed to feel toward her children every waking moment, but she had not felt it since daybreak. Since she had something worth protecting. Gently, she reached out and gripped Mamoru's arm. Sit with me, she said. What? If you're going to take the shortcut to school, you can spare a few Siarana to sit with your mother. Come. We'll watch the sunrise. The front deck of the Matsuda compound had a clear view down the mountainside. When the day was bright and cloudless, Misaki could see all the way down to the twinkling ocean. On chilly mornings like this, the lower half of the mountain disappeared in a sea of fog that changed color with the growing light. Right now, it was a pale blue, verging on lavender. Misaki sat with her knees tucked beneath her, hands folded in her lap, the picture of the demure housewife she had cultivated over the past 15 years. Beside her, Mamoru crossed his legs in a rigid approximation of his father's posture, but his heart was beating faster than Takeru's ever did. Despite the serenity of the mountain around them, Misaki was anxious. Mamoru's predicament placed her in a confusing position. She had it in her to ease her pain, but she couldn't do it with a housewife's soothing touch and meaningless reassurances. For once, she needed to be honest. And her honesty was rusty. She started with a small truth, just to see how it would feel. I never liked the cold. Mamoru turned to look at her with a question in his eyes. I'm a cold enough person in my Nayama and my personality that I can get quite enough of it all on my own. When it comes to the rest of the world, I like a little heat to offset all the ice in me. I know Jajaka Kuronu are supposed to hate fire, but I envy you whenever you leave to apprentice at the forges. Warmth is so hard to come by in this village. That's why I watch the sunrise out here whenever I get the chance. Misaki gazed wistfully over the mist. I like how I can feel the sun simmering on the horizon even before it comes into view. I like the moment it lights up the fog and then burns through it. That brightness reminds me that there's a world beyond this mountain, beyond Kaigen. No matter how cold the nights get here, the sun is rising somewhere. Somewhere, it's making someone warm. You've been out there, Mamoru said after a moment. He spoke cautiously too, hesitantly venturing out after her into this new territory. You never talk about it, but Aunt Setsuko says you went to Theonite Academy outside of Kaigen, all the way on the other side of the world. It was a long time ago, Misaki said. I was the age you are now. For a long time, they were quiet. More than once, Mamoru took a breath as though steeling himself to speak, then seemed to think better of it. His body was still, his eyes focused ahead, but the tension in his hands and the thud of his heart betrayed him. He was afraid, Misaki realized, afraid to ask what she knew of the outside world. His fear wasn't misplaced. There was a reason Takeru had forbidden any discussion of Misaki's school years. A good deal of what she knew was not only against the Matsuda creed, it could be considered treason against the empire. She couldn't give Mamoru her knowledge from daybreak any more than he could ask for it. But she had to say something. Listen, son, when I was your age, I had to face truths that seemed to break the world. That's what happens when you come into contact with people who aren't quite like you. You learn over time that the world isn't broken. It's just got more pieces to it than you thought. They all fit together, just maybe not the way you pictured when you were young. But how? Mamoru's voice cracked. I don't understand. How do I fit them together? If nothing is what I thought. Ka-chan, please, what am I supposed to think? That's something you'll have to decide for yourself, Misaki said. That's part of becoming an adult. Mamoru shook his head. What is that supposed to mean? A child doesn't have to take responsibility for his decisions. A child can trust in his parents to tell him what to do. A man trusts himself. But aren't we all children of the empire? Mamoru asked, and of course, he would think that. That was what he had been told in every story and song since he learned to speak. Don't we have to trust our government? I suppose so, Misaki said, and before she could stop herself, if you really want to be a child forever. Do you, son? She looked sharply at Mamoru in the growing light. Or do you want to be a man? I want to be a man, Mamoru said determinedly. It's just that I don't understand, Ka-chan. I'm a Koro, a Matsuda. When I grow up, I'm supposed to be a man of action with the power to shape history. How am I supposed to do that if I don't even know what's going on? A fair question, one that had no simple answer. See, that's the hard part, Misaki said, coming to terms with what you don't know, finding the answers, and acting on them without regret. Some people never learn. Some people learn too late. Nami, I wish I. Misaki pulled up short, shocked that she had let the thought even start to come out of her mouth. Because what had she meant to say? I wish I had had the courage to go against my parents and the empire. I wish I had made my own decisions when it mattered. If she had, the boy looking anxiously into her eyes would not exist. Gods, what kind of mother was she? What do you wish, Ka-chan? Mamoru asked with such innocent interest that Misaki could have curdled her own blood in shame. Nothing, son. She touched his face. I've borne a powerful Matsuda heir. What else could I wish for? A smart one, he suggested. Misaki laughed. You're smart, Mamoru, or you're starting to be. I'm sure you'll grow into a fine man. Will I? He asked with genuine worry. And Misaki had no idea how to answer. With her words failing, she borrowed some from her sword master. His wisdom may not have saved her, but maybe Mamoru could make more of it than she had. I know you might feel broken, but we're Jajakalu. We're water, and water can shift to fit any mold. No matter how we're broken and reshaped, we can always freeze ourselves strong again. It's not going to happen all at once, she added. You have to wait for the turn of the season to see what shape the ice will take, but it will form up, clear and strong. It always does. Mamoru nodded. But I'm not to repeat anything you or Kwangsen told me. No, Misaki said, but that doesn't mean you can't listen. You can learn a great deal listening to people with different experiences from your own. A Jasali once told me, listening never made any man dumber, but it's made a lot of people smarter. She waved a hand. That wasn't a very good translation. I promise, it sounds more poetic in Yamaninc. Like Matsuda Takaru I. Mamoru murmured, staring hard into the fog below. What? Misaki didn't follow his train of thought, but he seemed to have reached some kind of revelation. He learned from people who weren't like him. Even though he was a Koro, he grew up with blacksmiths. He was willing to learn from them and the foreign missionaries, even the son of his greatest enemy, and in the end, it made him stronger. For a moment, Misaki could only stare at her son. She had never thought of Matsuda history that way, in any way that related to her own experience, and here her bloodied, sleep-deprived 14-year-old boy had just connected two pieces of the world she never would have thought to fit together. Maybe she still had some growing up to do herself. Thank you, Ka-chan. Mamoru turned to her with a wide smile. I think I learned something. Misaki only stared. What? She tilted her head. You have dimples. I got them from you. The sun was visible now, burning through the mist, and Misaki brushed Mamoru's bangs back from his face. You know, Mamoru, you'll be a man sometime soon. But just for today, let me be your mother and tell you in all my motherly certainty that everything is all right. The world is whole. You are on the right path. Everything is going to be all right. He nodded. And Mamoru. She took his chin in her hand, turning his face toward hers. You're a good person. I trust you to grow up well. Thank you, Ka-chan. The slopes below had turned gold with sunlight. The sun set off the dewdrops like sparklers and shimmering waves up the mountainside. Beside her, Mamoru made a concerted effort to keep his eyes open, but as the sun warmed the world, his head sank against her shoulder. His Nyama, finally relaxed, started drawing him into the embrace of sleep. Someday, will you tell me about your foreign school? He murmured. About all the things you did when you were young? Misaki was not prepared for the ripple of warmth that touched her heart. She had never thought that anyone here in Takayubi would ask about daybreak. Hearing the words from her own child was more than she ever would have wished for. Someday, Mamoru-kun. Not today. Right now, you have your own future to look toward. Mamoru breathed out, his eyes falling shut. This is it, Misaki realized. This was the joy they had all promised, in a single, simple hope. Mamoru might grow up to be different from his father. The sound of small feet interrupted her thoughts. Good morning, Nagakuen. She recognized the springy, barefooted steps of her third son before she turned to look at him. Did you sleep well? Ka-chan. The toddler slurred, rubbing his eyes. Baby crying. I'll be right there, Misaki said softly. Mamoru was so deeply unconscious that he didn't even stir as she laid him down on the wooden deck and went to comfort Izumo. She hoped that Mamoru would be able to sleep for a little while before heading to school, but when she emerged from the children's room with Izumo in her arms and a sleepy Hiroshi following after her, she realized that this had been a foolish hope. Nisan up. Nagase giggled. The 3-year-old had clambered on top of his big brother and was alternately tugging his hair and slapping his face. Wake up. Ka-chan, Mamoru grumbled, his eyes blinking open. I'm being attacked by a demon. No. Nagase laughed in delight. No demon. It's me. Mamoru sat up, pitching his giggling brother into his lap. That's just what a demon would say. No. Still laughing like a maniac, Nagase squirmed out from under Mamoru's arm and made a break for the kitchen. Not so fast, abomination. Rolling onto his feet, Mamoru caught up to the toddler in 2 quick strides and scooped him up. I bet you haven't brushed your teeth yet, or I'm sorry, your fangs. He prodded his brother's cheek and Nagase snapped playfully at his finger. Yeah, let's brush those little demon fangs, shall we? As Mamoru slung Nagase over his shoulder and carried him toward the washroom, Misaki was overtaken by a memory more distant than daybreak, giggling through wood-paneled halls with her own brothers. Takashi said that he and Takaru had never really played as children, or rather that Takaru had never wanted to play with him. For 15 years, Misaki had lamented being fated to raise her husband's sons. All that time, she hadn't considered that these boys might have something of her in them too. She wondered, what else could I wish for? Chapter 8. The Letter. Frost crept up the tree branches as the month of Karankalo froze into a sparklingly cold Sibikalo. The sun set early, the Numu village burned bright in the frozen evenings, and Misaki was thankful that this new baby wasn't quite as cold as the others. Mamoru, Hiroshi, and Nagase had all gotten progressively icier as they grew stronger, but Izumo's little body stayed warm, even as his muscles came in, and Misaki found herself genuinely enjoying holding him close through that first month of the cold season. According to the news, some other villages and cities along Kaigen's western coast had been ravaged by storms. But Takayubi remained a picture of a small-town peace as Nagi cast his first snow on the mountain. Izumo's eyes came into focus on a world cloaked in white. Where previous winters there had been a solitary set of footprints through the first snow, now there were two. Kwang Chulhi showed up at the doors of the Matsuda compound each morning to meet Mamoru, and the two made their way down the mountain together, talking. When it came time for Geomagil to begin construction on its Infocom towers, Mamoru begged his father to let him join Chulhi and Kotetsu Atsushi on the construction team during his winter break. Misaki hadn't expected Takaru to agree, but he allowed it, on the condition that Mamoru keep up with his training and schoolwork. So, under mounting snow cover, Mamoru, Chulhi, and little Atsushi began work on the towers that would change communication in Takayubi forever. If Misaki had been a better mother, maybe she would have discouraged her son's friendship with the opinionated northerner. But Mamoru was a young man now, she told herself in justification. He could befriend whoever he wanted. She didn't know what he talked about with Kwang Chulhi. True to his promise, he never brought any of those conversations home with him, but the change in her son was visible. It was the marked difference between a carefree man and a thinking one. A swordsman was supposed to be wary of his surroundings. But it was one thing to be attuned to wind and water droplets, another to analyze and understand human actions. As Izumo's new eyes started to bring the physical world into focus, Mamoru's eyes were changing too. There was a sharpness to the way he looked at everything around him, a hunger, as he scrutinized the rough edges and shifting layers of his world, trying to make the pieces fit together. Misaki should have realized that it was only a matter of time before he did something stupid. He wasn't a Jasali, trained to retain and process the truths of the world, nor was he a peaceful craftsman. He was a fighter, with a fighter's ferocity. And there was a reason the Jasliwu, Finawu, and Numiwu of the world kept certain things from their Koronu. Jasliwu had the power to wrangle ideas without spilling blood. When Corona clashed, the results were always ugly. Mamoru, you seriously forged all of these yourself? Chulhi said, raising his eyebrows at Atsushi. Without any help? I'm in training to make the greatest swords in the world, the blacksmith's son said indignantly. I don't need help to forge a few nuts and bolts, especially since your company provided the steel and molds. Whose idea was it to have the local Nomiwa work from Geomagil molds? My father's, Mamoru said. He said it was the only way to cut costs enough to make the towers affordable. Well, they look great. Chulhi examined one of the screws with an appreciative smile. I know Numiwu and Yama who would kill to be able to do this. The three boys had already aided in the construction of 2 Infocom towers further down the mountain, near the village hall. This was the first time Atsushi had forged components without his father's help, as well as the first time the youngsters were being allowed to work construction without supervision. The foundation had been set, cement solution poured into deep holes, earlier that week. All the boys had to do now was assemble a 3-bound tall tower on top of it, working from the Kwang's blueprints. Do you know if they got the first 2 towers working? Atsushi asked as they moved the first beam into place. My father told me they already have all the utilities set up, Mamoru said. They were hoping to get it working today. Since Mamoru was a little boy, his father had worked an administrative job at the village hall. In the old days, Matsudas hadn't needed regular jobs. The surrounding Koro houses had provided them with everything they needed in return for the privilege of sending their sons to train in their dojo. But as the population of Takayubi dwindled, the Matsuda family had had to turn to other means of making a living. After the Kaliba, Matsuda Mizudori had become a sword instructor and then the headmaster of Kimono Academy. His son, Matsuda Susumu, followed in his footsteps, and his son, Matsuda Takashi, followed in his. As Takashi's younger brother, Takaru had spent a few years serving as the head sword instructor at Kimono, but after his father passed away, he had ceded the position to Yukino Dai to take a government job at the village hall. Mamoru wasn't entirely sure what his father did at work, just that it involved lots of paperwork and numbers, and kept him extremely busy. And whenever the government or a business introduced something new to the village, like new roads, or trash disposal systems, or infocom towers, Tusama was there to facilitate the process. So, once it's working, the computer at the village hall will be able to send and receive messages from anywhere? Atsushi asked. Not anywhere, Chulhi clarified. To start with, probably just other places nearby with working towers. Atsushi looked excitedly down the mountain toward the village hall. Do you think it's working yet? Chulhi pulled his infocom device out of his pocket and glanced at it. Not yet. How do you know? Chulhi held up the device to show Atsushi the screen. No signal. So, that infocom device will just connect automatically if there's a working tower around? That's the idea. So, for an infocom device to work all the time, there would have to be towers all over the world. Not necessarily, Chulhi said. The Yamankalu have satellites that send and receive infocom signals from space. What? Atsushi dropped the end of the beam he was carrying and Mamoru just barely managed to catch it in a pillar of ice before it crushed the blacksmith boy's toes. Careful. Sorry, Matsuda Dano. Atsushi bowed to him. Sorry, you're joking, right? He turned to Chulhi. Right, Kwang-san? You can't send communication signals that far. Chulhi smiled at the boy's disbelieving face. It's not a joke, Nomuden. As Chulhi explained Yama's satellites to Atsushi, the boys maneuvered the first beam into place. Is everything lined up? Mamoru asked from where he stood, supporting the heaviest part of the beam while the other two tugged it into alignment with the base. Perfect, Kwang said. Go ahead, Mamoru. Nodding, Mamoru let his Jia surge into action. The snow around them rose to encase the base of the beam in ice and form pillars to hold the top of it in place. This was a system the three of them had worked out over a week of working together. Mamoru maneuvered the pieces of the tower into place and held them there with the huge ice formations that only he could make. Chulhi and Atsushi inserted the screws. And then Atsushi welded the pieces together with his blowtorch. As they worked their way upward, Mamoru started forming steps of ice for the other two to climb to reach the tower's joints. So, no matter where you go in Yama, there's always a signal? Atsushi asked as he and Chulhi sat atop one of Mamoru's ice platforms a bound and a half from the ground, screwing a beam in place. Almost, Chulhi said, not underground. Wait. Atsushi paused. Does that mean these towers will be obsolete in a few years? No. Why would you say that? Well, if Yama has already had infocom satellites in space for years, Kaigen can't be far behind, right? Chulhi pressed his lips together and focused on tightening the screw before him. So far, he had avoided sharing any of his anti-government thoughts with Atsushi. Maybe because the Numu was younger than Mamoru, and he seemed so bright-eyed and innocent. Satellites are expensive, he said finally. But Kaigen has more money than Yama, Atsushi said. The economy's the best it's ever been. Well, Chulhi started. The thing about that is, Mamoru coughed. The ice under his control cracked violently, nearly pitching Chulhi and Atsushi from their perch, nearly. He wasn't irresponsible. Atsushi screamed and grabbed onto Chulhi, who grabbed onto the nearest beam. Sorry. Mamoru cleared his throat and righted the ice platform beneath them. I just inhaled some snow. While Atsushi reoriented himself, Chulhi stared over the edge of the platform down at Mamoru. Meeting his eyes, Mamoru shook his head. Atsushi wasn't soft-minded, but he was only 10. He wasn't ready to have his world ripped apart and turned upside down. Mamoru knew by now that he couldn't stop Chulhi's dangerous mouth by yelling at him, or punching him, or pleading with him to be more careful. He suspected as he held Chulhi's gaze that it was only a matter of time before little Atsushi was treated to the same horrible revelations he had experienced the day he met the northern boy. But for the moment, Chulhi relented with a roll of his eyes and changed the subject. The three were just discussing heading back to the village hall for lunch when Mamoru caught sight of a pair of figures coming up the mountain toward them. Even at a distance, Mamoru recognized his father's even, deliberate gait, eerily smooth over uneven ground. The other figure, trudging and stumbling along behind him, could only be Chulhi's father, Kwang Tae-min. Despite his breadth of knowledge and worldly air, the traveling geometrical representative was not a sure-footed creature. It was easy to tell that he was a stranger to snow and mountains. "Oh, Matsuda Dano," Atsushi said as he too caught sight of the men. "What is he doing up here?" "I don't know." Mamoru's brow furrowed. Kusama wasn't known for leaving his desk during work hours. After Chulhi and Atsushi finished securing the beam they were working on, Mamoru used his ice to lower them to the ground. Atsushi scrambled down as the adults approached and bowed deeply. "Appa, Matsuda-sama, good to see you," Chulhi said with a more casual nod. "What are you doing up here?" "Unfortunately, I need to collect my son and head home," Kusama said. "Something has come up." "Oh, it's going to be difficult to keep working without him," Chulhi said. "He's been doing most of the heavy lifting." "It's fine," Kwang Tae-min said. "I was going to call you boys down to the village hall anyway. I need your help with a few things." "Are the towers working?" Atsushi asked excitedly. "That's where I need your help, kid," Kwang said with a smile. "We have some frozen components, mostly wires. I was hoping you could help me find some better insulation." "Oh, of course, sir." After Chulhi and Atsushi packed up their tools, the group made their way back down the footpath toward the village. "I've never personally overseen construction in a place this cold," Kwang Tae-min said, carefully picking his way through the snow. "As a Jujaka, I suppose I should be embarrassed. After years of setting up geometrical infrastructure in Yama and Sizui, I've completely underestimated the destructive power of ice." The Kwangs and Atsushi went on discussing wiring, insulation, and a lot of technical things Mamoru only half understood until they reached the break in the path. One fork led toward the snow-covered village hall and the much bigger Infocom tower looming beside it. The other led back down to the village itself. "Goodbye, Matsuda Dano," Atsushi said, bowing to Mamoru and his father. Kwang just punched Mamoru in the arm. "See you tomorrow, Mamoru-kun." "See you tomorrow." Mamoru was so sure-footed that he was used to being the fastest up and down the rocky mountain paths, but Kusama didn't bother with the rocks at all. Ice changed shape to form level steps beneath his feet with each stride. Deep snow parted before him like it couldn't wait to clear his way. Like most Jujakalu, Mamoru needed to put in visible effort to manipulate water. Kusama's power was on a level where water scrambled to obey him, and Mamoru found himself struggling to keep pace. "That boy is very familiar with you," Kusama said without looking back at him. "We're classmates. Yukino Yuta and Mizumaki Itsuki are your classmates too. You haven't been spending much time with them this winter." "We still train together sometimes," Mamoru said. "I just wanted to work on the Infocom towers with Chulhi and Atsushi." He paused, glancing nervously up at his father's face. "If you want me to stop, I will, Kusama. I only joined the construction team because you said it was all right. It's fine with me. Just as long as you stay focused on your true purpose." His tone made Mamoru's gut clench in guilt. He still hadn't gotten any closer to mastering the Whispering Blade. "Yes, Kusama," he said. "So, can I ask why we're heading home so early?" he ventured, eager to change the subject. "I was going to leave early anyway. I have a meeting with my brother at the 11th Wadi at his office, but a letter just arrived for your mother, from Ishihama." Oh. Mamoru still didn't understand why that was cause for them to head back to the compound. It wasn't unusual for Ka-chan to receive letters from her family in Ishihama. The post workers at the village hall sometimes gave Kusama the family's mail to take home with him rather than delivering it to the door, but Mamoru had never known his father to rush them straight home. This letter was marked as urgent, Kusama explained at Mamoru's look of confusion. It was sent through the one-day express post with Lord Susanoo's personal seal, which means it must contain news he needs delivered right away. And Mamoru found himself picking up his stride, wondering what news from his mother's home was so urgent it couldn't wait a day. Misaki. You're home early, Misaki said in surprise. I'm sorry, I just put Izumo down for his nap, so I haven't prepared any lunch yet. Where are the other two? Takaru asked. He tended to do that, talk about the boys like they were items on an inventory. Hiroshi is at the elementary school for extra training and Nagisa is napping. After an uproarious 3 Watana chasing Ryota around in the snow, she was hoping he would stay down for a while. Give me a sira. I'll make you tea and put some lunch together. Before that, Takaru said, there's something you need to see. He pulled a scroll out of his sleeve and held it out to her. This is why we came back early. It's from your brother. Oh. Misaki took the Kayuri scroll from her husband. While Ishihama had working telephone lines, Takayubi did not, so on the rare occasions that Kazu contacted her, it was always through letters. But this was the first time one of them had ever been marked as express mail. She tore through the Tsusano seal and unrolled the scroll. Dear Misaki, I hope this message reaches you in time that you don't have to worry. Yesterday, our hometown and the neighboring area was hit by a coastal storm. Many homes were devastated, including our own Arashiki, and over 100 people have turned up dead so far. I just want to let you know before you hear about it on the news, that our family and friends are all alive and safe. Kaido and I sustained some minor injuries, but Ka-san, Tusama, Raiki, my wife, and all the little ones are unhurt. After all, we would hardly be Tsusanos if we couldn't weather a bit of wind and rain. All jokes aside, it seems like these storms have been especially bad recently. See if you can talk your husband into a vacation further inland. I hear the capital is lovely this time of year. Nayama to you, your brother, Susano Kazu, Lord of the Arashiki. What does Lord Susano say? Takaru asked. Misaki suppressed a smile. Even though it had been years since her father passed on the title, it was still funny to hear people refer to her silly baby brother as Lord Susano. Misaki handed Takaru the letter. His eyes flicked up and down, reading through it. What's this part at the end? Why is he recommending we go inland? I don't know, Misaki said honestly. Sometimes Kazu has an odd sense of humor. He knows we live on a mountain, right? We're hardly in danger of flooding. I know. It's strange. The whole thing was strange. The Arashiki was an old castle built into the rock face overlooking the sea. The power of the Tsusano clan made it the only safe landing place along a coast of wave-beaten rock. In the old days, the inhabitants of the storm fort had used their jia to bring trade ships from the mainland safely into port. During the Kaliba, when the mainland became the enemy, the Tsusanos of the Arashiki made a new name for themselves, dashing Ranganese ships to pieces on the rocks and raising the sea to swallow the survivors. Now the storm fort served as the Empire's guard tower, a watchful eye looking ever westward toward the Ranganese Union. While Misaki had reason to doubt her grandfather's stories that the Tsusanos had single-handedly wrecked half the Ranganese armada, it was hard to imagine any seafaring force passing their coast intact. But the ocean was a fickle ally. And for every day of diving gulls and bright sunshine, Misaki remembered a night of thunder and crashing waves that shook the cliffside. Tusama and the servants would go around shuttering the windows while Ka-san took Misaki and the two boys into the safe stone rooms deep inside the house. Misaki remembered gritting her teeth against the plaintive creaking of the walls, huddled into her mother's arms, her hands over little Kazu's ears. The storms, Ka-san said, were a reminder of their place in the world. Ours is borrowed power, she would say, a gift and a blessing. The true power belongs to the gods. But Nami and Nagi were always merciful to their Tsusano children. Despite the noise and terror, none of the storms had ever taken more than a few shingles and shutters off the mighty Arashiki. Misaki couldn't imagine a storm powerful enough to damage the stubborn barnacle of a fortress, much less destroy it. And Ishihama was in Shirajima, not far down the coast from Takayubi. If they had just suffered waves big enough to take out the Arashiki, how could the waters here remain undisturbed? How could the sky above the mountain be so clear? We should put on the news, Takaru said, to see if there's any more information on the storm. It wasn't unusual for the Matsudas to have the TV on while they ate meals. Most of the time, it was background noise, an endless procession of ignorably bland propaganda. But recently, Misaki had noticed Mamoru giving the screen his full attention, watching the billowing flags, pontificating Jaesliwu, and military demonstrations with almost predatory fascination. "I'm here in Ishihama," a reporter jauntily told the camera in Kaijengwa, where many homes were recently devastated by a terrible storm. "Our imperial troops have been working tirelessly to provide aid to the displaced and retrieve survivors from the wreckage." Misaki watched anxiously, hoping they would show some of the damage and at the same time hoping they wouldn't. Ishihama was the place of her earliest, most innocent memories. She didn't know if she could bear to see it in ruins. But they didn't show any footage. The reporter went on talking in front of a white winter sky, her hair and tasseled hanbok blowing in the wind. "Out of concern for our safety, the soldiers have not allowed my camera crew any closer to the destruction than this hill. We are truly lucky to have their help in this time of need and to have a leader who cares so deeply for all of our well-being. For some words from the capital, I give you to Jolly Banhyangji, voice of the emperor. Greetings, people of Kaigen, children of the empire." Banhyang's entrancing voice was as silky and strong as ever, though it carried a note of solemnity. Today, His Majesty's heart is heavy with the tragedy that has befallen his children in Ishihama. As the emperor's jauntly spoke, the screen finally began displaying still images of the destruction in Ishihama, houses reduced to rubble, forests flattened, cars floating in flooded streets. Then soldiers arriving in their crisp blue uniforms to help people out of the rubble, carry the wounded, and cradle lost children. "That's not real," Mamoru said quietly. "What?" Mamoru pointed just as the image disappeared from the screen. "That photo of soldiers handing food out to civilians. They used it a week ago when they reported on the storms in Heibondo and Yongseom." "I'm sure you're mistaken," Misaki said with a nervous glance at Takaru. "A lot of coastal towns look similar." "I'm not mistaken," Mamoru insisted. "That's the third time they've used it." By this time, the broadcast had switched to different footage, decimated houses and flooded streets. As Misaki looked more closely at the wreckage on the screen, she couldn't say that the landscape and architecture looked particularly familiar. It had been a long time since she had been to Ishihama, but she was sure that the landscape was rockier than the place they were showing. "Why do you think they're not using real footage?" Mamoru asked. "Mamoru," Misaki said warningly, "this isn't the time to be worrying about tiny technicalities. It's not a tiny technicality. They're not showing us any video footage. All the images could be faked," Mamoru, Takaru said. "Your mother's hometown was just struck by a terrible tragedy. Show some respect." "Is that respect?" Mamoru demanded, pointing to the screen. "They won't even give us the truth about what happened to those people. Do you call that respect, Tusama?" Misaki felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. She looked at Takaru and realized that she had no idea how he would react. She had never said anything like that to his face. She wasn't an idiot. "Mamoru, I don't think you know what you're saying." She scrambled to repair the damage. "His Majesty, the Emperor tells us what we need to know. It's not so much a matter of literal truth. I want to know what Tusama thinks." Mamoru looked to Takaru. "I think you must be running a fever," Takaru said after a measured pause. "Kotetsu Etsushi was sick with the flu last week, and now he's passed it on to you. Are you feeling unwell?" He was giving Mamoru a chance to back down, a chance any sane person would take under the weight of that icy stare. But Mamoru had apparently gone insane. "I'm feeling fine, Tusama," he said without hesitation. "Respectfully, I just want to know how you feel about your government lying to you." Takaru's expression barely changed, except for a deepening of the crease between his severe eyebrows. It was the scariest thing Misaki had ever seen. "It's that Kwang boy, isn't it?" he said darkly. "He's the one who's put these ridiculous ideas in your head." Mamoru took a breath and held his father's gaze. "Does it matter where the ideas came from if there's truth in them? What has he been saying to you?" "A lot of things. He says the hurricanes the government keeps reporting aren't really natural storms, they're Ranganese attacks." The feeling in Misaki's stomach turned from anxiety to pure dread. Then he's either a liar or an idiot, Takaru said dismissively. The Ranganese aren't powerful enough to cause that much destruction, especially in places like Ishihama and Yangtzeom, where there are strong warriors to oppose them. But he was wrong. The Ranganese Union was, and always had been, more powerful and cunning than the ruling Kaigenese were willing to admit. It was an arrogant misconception that had already cost them 2/3 of the empire. Buildings damaged by phonia looked different from those damaged by natural storms. Could that be why the news crews weren't allowed at the scene of the disaster? Was that why they weren't showing real footage? Kwang Chulhi says the emperor doesn't want us to know how strong the Ranganese have gotten, so we won't panic, so we'll stay here and die defending his coastline. You sound angry, Takaru said evenly. It is our duty to defend Kaigen, no matter what information the emperor chooses to share with us. But doesn't that just make us cannon fodder? It makes us the cannon. Mamoru faltered. But that's not, if the emperor won't even tell us. What the emperor does or doesn't tell us is irrelevant, Takaru said. None of it changes the fact that we are here to lay down our lives for the empire. We are the Sword of Kaigen. You say that, everyone says that, but in the end, a sword is just a tool. In one motion, Takaru stood and backhanded Mamoru across the face. Mamoru looked surprised. He shouldn't have. You will not say such things in my house. Do you understand? Yes, Tusama. I'm sorry. I thought I was raising a warrior, but your words reflect the ignorance and weakness of a child. Tusama, a warrior's sword isn't made of ice or metal. It is his soul, his focus, his conviction. That is what makes a whispering blade, and it's why you continuously fail to produce one. Yes, Tusama. Mamoru's voice was choked with guilt. I understand. If you understood, you wouldn't let such disgraceful nonsense pass your lips. The empire depends on us to be stronger than doubt, stronger than fear. As long as we are not broken, the Sword of Kaigen will not break and the empire will stand. Only a weakling would let himself doubt that. Are you that weakling? No, Tusama. We'll see, Takaru said icily. Get your sword. I'll be in the dojo, and he swept from the room. Still stunned, Mamoru lifted a hand to his face. He didn't touch his cheek where Takaru had struck him. Instead, he brought his fingers to his mouth, as though unable to believe what had just come out of it. I just said that. He looked at Misaki, wide-eyed with horror. I just said those things to my father. You did, Misaki said, rather stunned herself. Am I an idiot, Ka-chan? You might be. Misaki offered her son a smile, even as fear twisted in her stomach. Now, do as your father says. Go defend your idiocy. Is he going to kill me? If he is, you'd better die like a man on your feet. Nodding, Mamoru rose, squared his shoulders, and walked out of the room. Glory to Kaigen. Jolly Banhyang bellowed at his back. Long live the emperor.